Almost every movie and television show depicts the police in some way. They are central figures in our society, so it would make sense that they appear in most films and TV shows. But like most things in Hollywood, a lot of what is shown simply isn't true as it relates to how the law works and how police work is done in the United States. If you don't live in that world, and most people do not, you may not be able to easily separate fact from fiction. So what are the top myths about the police that you believe because of movies? What does Hollywood get wrong? And what's the reality when it comes to modern policing? Today on Revealing History, we're going to set the record straight. The mandate that the accused be advised of their rights found in the 5th and 6th Amendments of the United States Constitution were enshrined into law following the 1966 Supreme Court case, Miranda v. Arizona. Here's the scenario. Ernesto Miranda is arrested and charged with, among other things, rape. During his questioning, he confesses to the rape, both verbally and in written form. During the prosecution, that confession is entered in as evidence, and he is eventually convicted. The problem, according to his attorneys, was that he was not advised of his right to remain silent or his right to have an attorney present during questioning. As a result of that, the Supreme Court, in a 5-4 decision, decided that his constitutional rights had been violated. The case was remanded back to the original court, where he was again tried, this time without his confession, and found guilty. The advising of rights have become known as Miranda Rights, Miranda Warnings, or simply just Miranda. And advising somebody of their rights is referred to as Mirandizing them. And despite what you see in practically every cop show and movie, they are only required under a very limited set of circumstances. And in Hollywood, as soon as somebody gets arrested and has the handcuffs placed on them, there always seems to be somebody right there advising them of their rights to remain silent. In the real world, it doesn't happen that way, and legally, it doesn't need to. Only when a person is subjected to a custodial interrogation must their Miranda rights be advised. So if somebody is just being questioned during the course of a routine investigation and they haven't been arrested yet, they aren't entitled to the rights that are listed under Miranda. But in practically every show and movie where the police arrest somebody, you see them advising Miranda while they're still in the process of handcuffing them. It's like it's some kind of victory dance or something.
Victory dance! Woo!
And not everybody needs to be read their rights. Let's say, for instance, that you are locked up for being drunk in public. Odds are the only questions the police will be asking you are personal, such as your name, your date of birth, where you live, stuff like that. And none of that stuff is considered an interrogation, so Miranda isn't going to be read to you. And if the police do fail to read them to you, you aren't going to get set free under some kind of technicality. All that means is anything you say that incriminates you, it can't be used in court. And in some police shows, they seem to suggest that if you don't talk to the police, you're going to get charged with obstruction of justice. That simply isn't true, especially given what we just talked about regarding Miranda and your rights to remain silent. Oh, one more thing. Despite what you might see in shows like Law & Order and Blue Bloods, not everybody offers a full, detailed confession to their crimes. Most people who do talk will only give small details about what they did. But it's the small, seemingly insignificant details that can make or break a case. Really though, good police work oftentimes does not rely on a suspect's confession to make a case. But it doesn't hurt. This might be my favorite myth about policing. Practically every cop show or movie includes a shootout between the police and the bad guys. And then afterwards, the police are back on patrol, responding to calls for service or investigating a case. And what happens during the next episode? You guessed it. They get into another shootout with some bad guys. First off, cops in America very rarely ever shoot their guns outside of the yearly qualification. A Pew Research study that was done only a few years ago found that only 27% of officers fired their guns on duty over their career. Now, at first glance, that might seem really high, but Understand this, that the vast majority of those shootings involve things like euthanizing deer and other animals that have been struck by cars. And you might think that most police work in large cities like New York and LA and Chicago, none of which have a high population of deer. But in reality, most work in rural areas for departments consisting of less than 100 employees. So it's not uncommon to have to euthanize a deer or another animal on a weekly basis. Now, that's not to say that the police don't regularly brandish their firearms at dangerous suspects, but they rarely have to shoot. And on the occasion when the police do have to shoot, there's always an investigation that needs to be completed to ensure that no department policies were violated or laws broken. And of course, that's especially true if somebody is shot. And in the event of an officer-involved shooting, most departments have a policy requiring the officers to be placed on administrative leave for up to 3 days. Sometimes it's even more. So if you see an officer in a Hollywood production shooting somebody and then going right back to work, know it's just a work of fiction. Here's another thing that gets me every single time, and it's not just in police movies, it's also in war movies and action movies. When somebody gets shot and they go flying back into a wall like they've been hit by a car. In reality, that does not occur. Typically, when somebody gets shot, if they even fall at all, they generally just fall straight to the ground. But like everything else in Hollywood, it looks cool, it's entertaining, it adds dramatic effect, so that's why they put it in the movies. Paperwork is probably the worst part of policing. Heck, it's probably the worst part of any job. But in movies and TV, you don't always get to truly appreciate how much paperwork there is to complete every time an officer makes an arrest. There are times when the majority of a police officer's time on duty on any given day is spent in front of a computer completing paperwork. Take an arrest, for instance. First, there's the arrest paperwork needed to get the suspect processed. Then there's the criminal complaint needed before the officer goes before a magistrate or judge to obtain the proper charges. And then there's the detailed report documenting the incident and arrest. And all of that is just the minimum amount of paperwork needed. Depending on the agency and the type of incident, there could be more. There have been significant advancements in forensics over the last 40 plus years, and DNA is probably the most important. And many arrests are made that would not have been able to have been made if not for the work of forensic teams. After watching your favorite cop show, you think that it only takes an hour to get the report back from the lab. Not even close. When evidence goes to the lab, it can take weeks or even months to be examined, a report written, and then sent back to investigators. And because many state labs are overwhelmed and understaffed, unless it's a homicide or other serious crime like a rape or a shooting, the lab generally won't even entertain doing an analysis of the evidence. And what about the evidence that goes to the lab? Just because DNA or hairs and fibers goes off to be collected doesn't mean a suspect will be identified. This is how DNA analysis works, for example. Let's say a screwdriver is recovered from a crime scene and sent to the lab to be analyzed, and then DNA is recovered from it. Now what happens? Well, that DNA is entered into a database which then compares it to other DNA samples in the database, looking for a match. Well, if a bad guy has never had their DNA sample recovered, there won't be a match. The same holds true for the fingerprints. There has to be an entry in the database of a known sample for there to be a match. Forensics can be the key to getting a conviction in court, but when it comes down to finding and arresting suspects, it ain't magic. It plays a role, an important role, but it isn't the be-all, end-all the way Hollywood portrays it to be. And closing a case with an arrest almost always results from good old-fashioned police work conducted by good investigators. You always see the bad guys in police shows demanding their one phone call. Their constitutionally entitled phone call, as some call it. Well, there is no such thing. The police do not have to allow you to make a phone call. It's a privilege, not a right. Act like an ass to the police and you probably will get denied your opportunity to make that call. And many jails actually allow you to make as many phone calls as you want, as long as you're willing to pay for them. Although we are living in a high-tech world, and many fictional police departments on television are shown utilizing high technology to solve cases, that's not how it works in the real world, at least not for most departments. You see, police departments are funded using tax dollars and have to compete with other government agencies for those very limited dollars. That means the average department is utilizing 20-year-old technology not capable of integrating with newer cutting-edge tech. Now, there are state and federal resources available to agencies across the United States, but those can be in very high demand and waiting times can be months. Even relatively simple tech like tasers or body-worn cameras can be in limited supply for most medium to small departments. Now, we shouldn't be too critical of Hollywood for getting some of this stuff wrong. Most people really don't care about the accuracy, they just want to be entertained. And for the most part, Hollywood does a pretty good job of doing that. I personally tend to be overly critical when they get something wrong. But again, perhaps that's just me. How about you? Do you really care if your favorite cop show or movie is 100% accurate? Let me know down in the comments what you think. And since we're on the subject of Hollywood movies getting it right, or getting it wrong, I'm sure it won't come as a surprise to you to learn that war movies have been known to get a thing or two wrong. I know some people that live to pick war movies apart. I might be one of them. To find out the top myths that we believe because of war movies, click the screen now. And until next time, I'm Dennis Gill for Revealing History.